Hello, folks. Welcome back to the Redeemed Marriage Podcast. This is Rusty and Heather Bryant. If you are new to our podcast, we love to talk about marriage, and we talk about redemption, and we give just marriage advice based on our story and things that we've learned throughout 28 years of marriage, 13 of those being a redeemed marriage. And so if you're not familiar with our story, go back and take a listen to lots and lots and lots and lots of other episodes. I love how people will reach out to us and say, "Oh, we just found you." And there was one the other day that said, I just found you and I started binging you and I'm on episode 5. And I was like, not far now. And I think I responded. We literally, like, if you reach out to us, if we don't respond to you, it's probably because it went to spam or something. I mean, because we do. We respond to everything. And somebody said they were listening and they were on episode number 5, and I responded and I said, "Well, I promise that the audio gets better." That I have no idea. But we got a lot of advice along the way, and people said, leave it up there. Why would you not leave it up there to see? And it shows how far you've come. Mm-hmm. And chances are people aren't going to go all the way back to the beginning and go, this is garbage.
To this one. Yeah.
So I don't know. It's there.
And then we had somebody this morning also that says she just listens to our, 30-ish minute podcast on the way home from work, which is several hours that she has to drive. And she said, and you would think I would just listen to that one, but every time y'all say something about, we've talked about this before in another podcast, and then I have to go hunt for that one.
Well, we better start thinking of what are we going to talk about today that we can send people back to back in time.
In episode 5.
Yeah. Well, hey, but seriously, thank you for listening. And we know that over the last few weeks, we've got lots of new listeners through different events and things that we've been a part of. So it's really great to have a lot of you on board. And hey, we would love for you, if you've never done this before, make sure that you follow us, whatever podcast platform you listen to. Most of you we know are on Apple Podcast or Spotify. If you're on one of those, hit follow. We also do the video version of this. Mm-hmm. So if you've never checked that out, go over to YouTube. You actually get to see what we look like. And I don't know if that's good or bad. I mean, I like to think it's good, at least if they just watch your part of it, your side of the screen. But you can follow us on YouTube as well, and we also put other videos and stuff up. We've started doing some video shorts, so we put several of those up a week if you want to check those out. But you can also follow us on social media, and we're on Facebook and Instagram. And if you've never hit the like button on Apple Podcast or on Spotify, the little heart or the rating. That's what I'm trying to say. The rating. Sorry. The rating. Give us a rating. And then on Apple, you can even leave a review. And so most people, look, I listen to so many podcasts, and it reminds me from time to time, like I'm reminded, hey, I need to help these people, because I know it doesn't necessarily do anything for me and Heather. Like it's great to see those ratings and reviews, but what it does is it somehow affects how many people actually, like new people, get suggested.
Yeah, it puts it in front of different people.
Exactly. And so I just think that's how you can be a part of helping our message of hope get out to more people. Yeah. So, it's like again, it's not for us to boost our ego and go, oh, look, we got another person. It's not that. It is, we've been praying. We literally been praying this month for just numbers, not because we want to, because nobody will ever know. Nobody will know if we don't say how many downloads and how many listeners we have. Nobody knows, and that's fine. But we know that this is a big old world, and because of the prayer requests we get during the P28 challenge, and the comments and the DMs on Facebook and Instagram and the contact forms, we know that there are a lot of marriages that are just in a wreck.
Yep.
And so if that's the case, and those are just the small handful of people that we actually hear from, how many more are out there that just need some hope?
Yeah. And tell them the statistic you read this week about the percentage of churches.
Churches, yes, I read this that said 85% of churches across all denominations spend $0 of their budget on marriages. And hey, we went and spoke at a church Friday night, and like I just want to say, what a great church.
That's right.
Like, go to that church, go to that church because they're investing in marriages.
Yep. And they had a little date night, and they had it catered, and then we spoke.
Fun.
It was just, and that all of those people there were encouraged, to fight for their marriage and to put hedges of protection around their marriage and to see it as valued. And they weren't people that were going through infidelity, or, I mean, they may have been, but we don't know any of their stories. They were just people who were like, we want to do best in our marriage.
Yeah.
And the church was encouraging them in that. I love it.
Yep. It was great. Okay. So thank you. You can help us is basically what we're saying.
Yeah.
And also, if you've never, we have to make sure we say, go visit our website, theredeemedmarriage.com. Lots of resources there. We're actually going to be putting up a new resource at the beginning of the month, which is almost the beginning of the month, because we'll be taking down our P28 sign up for our prayer challenge sign up.
It's going to be March.
Yep. So shortly thereafter, there's a new resource that'll be on there that you guys can download. It's actually a resource menu, and it has all of our resources in one document that you can click on.
Oh, that's cool.
So it's really cool. Yeah.
Good job, babe.
Yeah. So it's like a menu. Like if you went to a restaurant, it's done like a menu.
What you want to order. That's cute.
So yeah, check that out sometime when you get a chance. And so let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. We're talking about a question that keeps coming up. This came up several times, I think, after our video was shown at our church. There were a couple of people or multiple people asked us about it just in person. But we have people ask us this all the time in marriage coaching. And then we actually want someone that we're currently marriage coaching. They have an opportunity when they sign up for their next session to put a question of what they want to talk about. Well, now we're not going to have anything to talk about because we're about to talk about it on the podcast, and they'll listen to it. But this was a question that was asked, and I was like, man, this seems to be a theme people are curious about. So the question basically is the gist of it, because I've heard it lots of different ways. It's basically, how do you guys handle being able to talk about your story over and over and over in coaching sessions and on the podcast and in front of groups or whatever? How can you do that without it bringing back all of the pain and hurt and basically affecting us to where we, go in a pit? Because I know that most people out there, when they talk about whatever they've been through, it hurts.
It hurts.
And it brings up all kinds of emotions that then puts them in a funk probably. And they're like, y'all do this all the time. So and I think they probably want to know, how can we get to the point where we can actually talk about it in a healthy way? I think what happens, and the reason why people ask this, is because they're like, you guys talk about it all the time. We're trying to heal, and we never talk about it because we're scared to talk about it. Because we know when we talk about it, it's going to cause this big, argument, or somebody's going to be hurt. So many emotions are going to happen, and then we don't accomplish anything. We take a step backwards. Whereas they look at us and they're like, well, y'all talk about it literally all the time.
Right.
So we're going to tell our secrets today. I don't even know what those secrets really are, but we're going to tell them. We're going to tell you what happens in our life. So you want to give any insight, or you want me to keep rolling?
Well, I just, when you brought this topic to me, it's something that I look at and I'm in awe of, because I feel like shame and guilt could really, really get to me. And not only that, but when we listen to other people's stories, specifically infidelity, but even other stories of broken trust, it is just, you look at it and you say, and I feel like I could carry the weight of what they're walking through because I feel it all over
you
again.
mean when people tell us their story? Okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking like if we were listening to a like a
when,
podcast, like
no, when other people tell us their story,
because we hear that
it's heavy
every day,
and it could be really heavy into thinking, that's how I was, or that's, how are they going to make it, and just carrying just this load. And I think that it is, well, I know for sure it is by the grace of God that we can talk about our story in a healthy way to help other people. And it just, like, I constantly remind myself, before we get on calls, before we sit down with people, before we do podcasts, that our goal is to point to Jesus and not us. Because if we were pointing to us, then I think a lot of it could be hard to talk about. And because it's like, oh gosh, they're going to think differently of me. And, I battled that Friday night when we spoke in front of those people. I introduced myself to all these people and they had one image in their mind. And then the moment you started talking and telling our story, I was like, whoop, there that goes. And so, I have to battle that a little bit, but the whole point of me saying that is the minute that thought comes into my head, or the enemy says, yep, that's what they think about you now, I remember that our story is not about us. Our story is about Jesus. And when you put that hope to other people, then it becomes easier to walk through. But there are, I think, other ways that we deal with it when we talk about our story among us, because people that are listening are like, yeah, that's great, but we're not talking on a podcast. How can we just talk about it in our everyday life if we need to? Or we have couples that have recently said, hey, we get an opportunity to tell our story to another couple in our church that's struggling, and pray for me because I'm scared to death because, nobody knows, or, and so I think that this is important for everybody on how we can discuss it without just, not only jumping in a pit, but burying ourselves in it.
It's really interesting that you said that about Friday night when we spoke at this event, because we do tell our story all the time, and we're getting to interact with other couples most of the time through Zoom calls and our marriage coaching and stuff. But when we do have the opportunity for it to be a little more public, I know leading up to Friday night, I was really excited, and because we always get excited about speaking and sharing and whatever we can do. But I was the one that told our story. And so when I started and the words actually started coming out of my mouth, it was like, ooh, man, that's what happened. And now we're telling all of y'all what happened. Because we go through, hey, fairy tale marriage. And then... And then year 15, on August the 23rd, 2011, I came home. You said you had been unfaithful. When those words, it's just like, oh. But then it's like God just kind of transforms everything, and it becomes his message. Now, there's a couple of things that I've thought about as I thought through this. One is, this morning we had an amazing message, and we've got to post some stuff about it this week on social media.
You will hear it all week long.
Probably so. But I do want to tell you, so many of you ask about forgiveness. Forgiveness, if you're listening to this podcast, more than likely there's some sort of forgiveness. I mean, everybody has to forgive their spouse for something. But for those of you that are listening, you've got big stuff, heavy stuff in your marriage that you've had to forgive or working towards forgiveness. It's a question that's asked of us all the time. And we have books that we recommend, one book in particular. But it's something that, like, for me, I think that it's such an important part of the process, of the healing process, that one day after we write our book, we're going to really dive into forgiveness and try to figure out how to put it into words. And we may just steal the sermon that we heard today. But
Wait, after we write our book?
After me and you write our first book. See, I've already got multiple books
my bad.
ready for
Excuse
down
me.
the line.
Excuse me.
Oh,
so we're just going to take all of Chip's sermon and write a book about it?
Well, we might. That'll be our second one, is what I'm saying.
I
Not
got
our
it.
first
Not
book.
our first one.
Not our
Okay.
first book.
I got
Okay.
it.
We are about to start writing our first book, by the way. And then we're just going to be on a roll, and we'll probably just start spitting them out.
Yep.
Okay. By the way, try to find time to write a book. That's fun. That's fun. People have been telling us for years, y'all need to write a book.
Okay,
Yeah, we
we
do.
do.
Okay. So anyway, the sermon. Chip Henderson is the pastor of Pine Lake Church in Mississippi. Go look it up. Look up today. Today is February the 23rd. He preaches a sermon on forgiveness, and it is amazing, incredible. And so much of what we share with couples, he said it. In fact, when that other staff member from the Reservoir Campers came up afterwards and was introducing himself, oh my gosh, what a guy. But I basically told him, I said, that sermon today, that's my testimony.
Yeah.
And
That's awesome.
oh my gosh, it was amazing. So anyway, one of the things that he said in the sermon today was, telling your story is part of healing. I can't remember was that the exact quote that he said?
I don't think so, but it's close.
It's close. Okay, telling your story
Brings
healing. Okay, maybe that's what he said. Telling your story brings healing. And I wrote it down, and I was like, man, what? Like, you think of how many times we've told our story, and if that's genuinely, which I believe, but if that's a part of healing, then that, like, us telling it over and over and over has been like mounds and mounds and mounds of healing on top of each other because we've told it to so many people. And so there's people out there there's people listening to this that not one single person knows their story except for them.
Yep.
And I get it. Look, nobody wants the only reason y'all are going, well, why'd y'all do it? Well, ours was public. We didn't have a choice.
Yep.
And so then we decided, well, God's going to get the glory for this, like you've said.
Everybody was talking about it anyway.
Yep. And you've said so many times, we're not going to let the enemy get all the glory from the story.
That's right.
So we want God to get the...
Because that was the only part that people knew was all the bad that happened, and the embarrassment and the shame and the guilt and all of that. And I was like, since all the people know that anyway, let's take that away from the enemy and give God the glory for our story. Give him the glory for redemption and restoration and for the hope that comes along with it. And I think, you were talking about how it brings about healing, and it does, because we remind ourselves every time we tell it of the miracle that it is. It's not just, I told it to another person so it doesn't hurt as much anymore. It's a reminder of who we are now when we tell it. And I think about, like, even, our boys, if they went through hard things, they're obviously, not even with relationships. If they go, let's take Luke, for example. Luke did the D1 soccer thing. He was the greatest player to come out of Mississippi. He's good. Listen to me talking soccer like I know, but he was good. I know I'm his mom, but he was good. And he went to a D1 soccer school in Davidson, in North Carolina. Then I had an opportunity to play a 5th year because of a COVID year at Oregon State. The boy could not stay healthy. He just was injury after injury, just reoccurring hamstring issues. He could not get healthy. And he could be very discouraged in the fact that his soccer career ended that way, when the dream obviously was to play higher level for him. He could be very discouraged. But when he tells that story, every time he tells it to someone different, hey man, what happened with soccer? He tells it in a way that he reminds himself that soccer is not his identity, that God has a purpose for him on this planet that didn't include soccer or from now on, or his body would have cooperated, you know? And so when he tells, okay, right now I'm doing something different, and he's actually using soccer to be able to tell other people about Jesus, that's the ultimate goal. That the ultimate goal is not for him to have been playing D1 soccer. And so even in him telling his story that has nothing to do with marriage, has nothing to do with relationships, he is reminding himself of God's purpose for him, that God gets the glory in that, and that we are just each trying to follow the path that God has for us.
Well, yeah, and I think even every time a story is told like that, you pick up something different that you haven't really thought about before. And like even when you were just talking about Luke, like I started thinking and I was like, he is getting to continue soccer, but it's with kids and coaching. And I started thinking, and I was like, well, if he had stayed healthy, he had a chance at playing professional soccer for sure. And then he would have had that platform, but who knows what that would have done to his life. And then instead, and now he's doing something that he probably would not have done if he had gone on to do that. Right. And so now he's got this chance to influence little kids that, gosh, he's so good with kids. Both of our boys are. They're like the Pied Piper. But now he's going to get to do that.
The who?
The Pied Piper, that, and everybody follows along the Pied Piper.
Oh.
No, you remember that story? Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're getting a little derailed here, a little distracted. So anyway, I just think it's important, though, telling your story, you learn something different every time, even about God and the character of God.
That's right.
And so I think the encouragement is, man, you got to tell somebody. And I'm not saying that you have to be on a podcast or you have to call your church and say, give us the mic next week. We're getting up there and letting everybody know.
That's right.
But it is so important for you to let somebody in on your story because it is part of healing. And even if that's us, you know, and like, hey, if maybe your first stab at this is you sit down with your spouse and you say, hey, let's just tell Rusty and Heather our story because they get it. They understand it. You may not even know us. You may be in another country somewhere. Sit down and write it out on an email and send it to us and let us know. I mean, if we're the outlet for you for your first time to share it. But then I would encourage you, find a mentor in church. Find someone in your community, somebody that you trust, that you can just say, hey, man, I want somebody to pray for us. Yeah. And this is our story. And telling that story with your spouse, I think, is important too, to be able to do that with your spouse. And when you do that, it starts bringing healing. Yep. And you'll find that it becomes easier and it opens up opportunities for you and your spouse to begin to talk about it as well.
Right. And that's if there has been some healing and you have some reconciliation going. You might be in a spot where your spouse wants nothing to do with it. And you just need to talk to somebody. Yeah. And that's so important because if you try to deal with that on your own, you're going to drown. If you have a spouse that is like, yeah, we're not doing any of this, we're not telling anybody, and then maybe they're just continuing in sin. Well, you can't walk that journey by yourself. And so it's important too that you go to somebody and say, I need help. I cannot journey through this alone. We were never meant to journey alone.
No.
Never meant to journey alone. And what I love what you said, like finding somebody a mentor at church or somebody that can just point you to Jesus. I had the opportunity recently to meet with just somebody for one time, and she told me that only one other person knew their story, and it was somebody at work. Well, I got really nervous because I was like, oh no, because you can always find somebody that'll tell you what you want to hear. But I point blank asked her, I said, is this person a godly person that is going to point you towards truth, towards scripture, towards word? And she was like, yes. And I was like, okay. So it doesn't have to be a not a church person, a church, like a staff member.
Right.
It can be somebody that is just going to point you towards truth.
Yeah. I was thinking about people that are listening, and they're like, okay, well, we want to be able to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And, it puts us in a pit. So my answer to that would be, well, like we said, as you share with somebody else, telling your story brings healing. So it will open up opportunities for you guys to also talk about it. But even beyond that, because it's not like you're going to go, okay, well, we need to set up an appointment for the next 3 weeks with 2 different people to tell our story so that we can heal. Like, I'm not saying to do that, but you and your spouse also need to be able to talk about it and do it in a healthy way where you understand that the reason why you're talking about it is not to bring up old wounds. It's not to point fingers or hold something over somebody's head or remind them. It's for healing. And so if you need to, that's the attitude of talking about it. So I'm going to shift for just a second, and I want us to end with this. I want to just really share the real answer to this. Not that the other answers were fake, but the real answer is probably something that's a little harder for people to hear. So as I was talking this a couple of weeks ago, when it was actually a staff member at our church, I had gone for a meeting about something, and he asked me, it was maybe even the day after our video was shown, and he asked me that question: how do you guys talk about this all the time and it not affect you? And I sat there for a minute because I knew that he would understand this maybe more than the average person. But I basically said, I don't know that I can put it into words because there is something supernatural and spiritual about it that allows us to have gotten the healing that God has brought upon us has gotten to a point where it's almost the opposite effect for us. When we talk about it, we find ourselves drawn closer together. I find myself every time having more and more empathy for you and, the shame and guilt that must come with sharing it. And just as a reminder of who you are and what God has done in your life, and it makes me more in love with you and more attracted to you. And so,
and if I can interrupt you for a minute, it does the same thing for me when I listen to you talk about it, because I am just reminded you stayed. Like, you chose to stay after everything was exposed. You chose to walk alongside me. And so I fall in love with you every time even more, because I'm like, he could have left. He could have, I would have been the one destroying our family because I did the actions, but you could have just walked away and said, I'm not doing this. But you fought for me. You fought for our family. You fought for our boys. And I'm reminded of that as you tell our story. So it's not just one-sided in that.
I'm about to say something that I don't know that I've ever said before, and it's probably something that needs to actually be an entire podcast at some point. But this part of it will blow people's mind, and maybe it will just kind of emphasize what I just said about it, everything about it being so supernatural that can't be put into words. But I still hurt from, there's wounds. So I don't want anybody to think that there's never any. We've talked about this pain, but it's just different. so I do still have pain, and I do still have wounds, and there's things that come up, and I'm triggered, all of that. I'm a normal person in that regard. The part that's supernatural to me is when we talk about it and I now hurt more for you than I hurt for myself. And I hurt more for you because I can't imagine living with, like I can, because I know what you've walked through.
Yeah.
But it's like I hurt that you have to live with that. So it's not even that I'm angry with you, that you've hurt me, that I've got these wounds that won't ever heal. It's more of I hurt that you had to go through that. Not even that I had to go through what I went through.
Yeah.
It's more of I hurt that you now have to live with that because that's not who you are. And so anyway, that's a whole nother, that's another podcast in itself. But this is the last thing. I said that just a second ago, the last thing, but this is the last thing. I was listening to Levi Lusko this week on an interview, and he was talking to another couple, a redeemed marriage type couple, and he made the comment and said, I believe that God holds you guys up as a trophy for the world to be able to see a redemption story that they need to hear. And man, that's what I think about our story and what God does. Like, he's the one that's getting all this glory. And so part of that supernatural, I keep saying the word supernatural, but part of that spiritual that you can't explain is, I believe it's literally because God, he's not going to allow us to continue to tell our story over and over and over, knowing that every time it's going to put us in some kind of a pit. Because what he's doing is he's holding it up. Like he's the one that's holding this up for us, and crying out for a world that needs to hear a story of hope of what he did in a marriage, and he's holding it up. And so he's not going to allow us to go through the pit every single time. Instead, just like he wants the world to see not our story for the junk that it was, but to see the redemption part of it. And in the same way, when we share it, that's what he wants us to see too. So that's what we see because that's what he's got on display for us. So.
Amen.
All right, there you go. Oh man, we're over our time. So
shocker.
Yeah, we love going over time because we just like for all of our regular listeners to be able to pull it up each day and go, how far over did they go today?
That's right.
And when I say over, we're in charge. I tell you that all the time. Doesn't matter how long we go.
That's right.
All right, you guys, thanks so much for listening to us. We love all of you, and we're glad that you would take 30 or 33 minutes out of your day to listen to us. And we hope that it's encouraging to you, and we will see you guys next week.
Peace.
Peace.